Shalom, shalom. It's a delight to be here today with Rav Gavriel Reiss, who was born and raised in LA, but moved to Israel as a teenager. He served in elite IDF units before dedicating himself to Jewish education. In 2017, he embarked on a trailblazing initiative to break out of the security fence of Pnei Kedem in southern Judea to create a farm that would not only serve to help Jews learn to live more authentically on the land, but also prevent the European Union from usurping land in Area C through its proxies in the Palestinian Authority. If not for this farm, the Jews of southern Judea would have been completely cut off from the Dead Sea. Rav Gavriel holds a triple degree in philosophy, political science, and economics from Hebrew University, and a letter of Yoreh Yoreh from Rav Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg Zitzal. Thanks so much for taking time to talk.
Thank you for having us.
So there's a thinker who you have been influenced by and who you recommend, named Rav Yehuda Ashkenazi, who many people have not heard of, also known as Manitou. And he was born in 1922 in Algiers and died in 1996 in Yerushalayim, and was a spiritual leader of 20th century French Jewry and beyond. And I know very little bit about him. So I would love to hear from you why you think his Torah and his message are important.
Well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about Manitou. I never met Manitou, okay, but my personal connection to him is that, first of all, most of the Torah that I learned was through, I would say, Rav Uri Sherki, who teaches in Machon Meir, is an important rabbi of the, I guess you could say, the national religious movement. He himself was also a Talmid of a student of Rav Yehuda Kook, and the son of the famous Rav Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Kook. And he's a very, very central figure and a very interesting figure because he brings out ideas of the, one of the primary texts that Rav Kook, the father, wrote. He describes the Jewish people and says that there are three forces in the Jewish people. There's the force of the nationalist movement, in other words, like the secular Zionism, and then there's the force of those who believe in Kodesh and holiness and like keeping halacha, the Haredi, what we call the Haredi. And he said, but there's also a force that's so important that's called the universal or humanist aspect of the Jewish people, which is the idea that all of mankind is connected. And that came in the time of Rav Kook, was expressed in the idea of like even sometimes on one side of the scale, the Bund maybe of the socialist movement, or even the communist movement, or like liberal progressive movements that we have today in the world. The problem is that each of these three camps works separately, and they're in battle one with the other. And that's actually a positive thing that is taught. It's a positive thing because each camp then can bring out its real forces. Like if you go to work out in a gym, okay, you work out in a gym, you want a force that's going to be working against you, and that's how you become stronger. And that's also what happens to each of the three forces. But the secret that Rav Kook talks about, and that this comes out in the Torah that I learned from Rav Sherki, is the idea that for us to be who we're supposed to be, the Jewish people who we're supposed to be, we have to have not a compromise between these three forces of holiness, nationalism, and universalism, not a compromise, not give up on one of them in order to have some kind of mediocre mean or middle field, but to have a synthesis, a harmony of these ideas, the oneness of these ideas, the combination of these ideas. That means we have to be more Jewish nationalist, we have to be more holy, Kodesh, and we have to be more universalist. And that's where I think we are right now at history. And that's why the Torah of Manitou is so important, because we're supposed to talk about. I met that Torah through Rav Sherki, who was one of my teachers, and also some other teachers. And I realized afterwards that most of these great ideas, these great teachings that are so inherent in our Torah, they came from the figure that you mentioned, the great Rav Yehuda Ashkenazi, who's known as Manitou, who was a teacher, and he's very little known. He's very little known because he grew up, as you said, in Algeria. His history was very interesting. His father was the last chief rabbi of Algeria. So he has that side. His mother's side was a descendant of one of the Gorei Ari. That means one of the students of the Ari Zatzal, who taught the great Kabbalist, who taught in Tzfat, in Safed, is that how it's called in English? In the late Middle Ages, like that period of time, 16th century. Most of the writings of the Ari Zatzal were passed on by Chaim Vital. And like we have the book Etz Chaim, which is like the central book of the Ari. The Ari didn't write himself, but Chaim Vital wrote these things. Manitou, Rav Ashkenazi, was descended through his mother from another one of the students of the Arizal, who was actually opposed in a way to Rabbi Chaim Vital. And there's a whole story behind that, but we don't have time in this podcast to get into it. But in other words, he had a clear line of real Torah, the Sephardic Torah, the Torah of the Arizal. During World War II, he was drafted into the French army and he fought in World War II. And he ended up moving to France. He had French citizenship as a Jew. He moved to France after the war. And there he also was connected to the Torah of some Ashkenazic rabbis, some very famous Ashkenazic rabbis, and also some very mysterious figures, like one who's very little known named Mar Shushani, who they say was a total genius and also a crazy man. I heard Manitou once say, and I'll tell you how I can hear Manitou, even though I never met him. Manitou once said, I heard him say, some people say Mr. Shushani was 50% genius and 50% crazy. And he said, that's not correct. He was 100% genius and 100% crazy. And so he had a very, very pure line of thought. And he became a teacher in France. And why is he not known? Because he was teaching in French to French Jewry, even though he had these tremendous traditions that he knew. And as time went on, he ended up coming to Israel, and he met Rav Yehuda Kook, and he became what was called, it's very strange, like there aren't many people I know like this. Most of the people are the Talmidim of Rav Yehuda Kook, but Manitou was not, he was always called a Talmid Chaver. He had a solid Torah that he already came with when he came and met Rav Yehuda Kook. And he saw that there were things that he connected to, and he saw him as also one of his masters, and like as one of his the sages that he connected to, and he connected to that Torah. But it was novel for him, but it also connected to things that he'd already learned from home through his father and his mother's side of the family, and all the great people he studied with in Europe. And he became what's called a Talmid Chaver. So he was like always kind of like on the side. He was very respected by Rav Yehuda Kook, and he had many, many students who were coming to him, mainly French. He taught also in Hebrew, and his Torah is something that is so important for American Jewry today. That's why it's such a privilege for me. Like I've been here now, I've been in America now for 2 weeks. I haven't been here in 10 years. Obviously, I grew up here, and I'm familiar with American Jewry, but I also, my personal story, I didn't grow up inside of a Jewish community here. We were to Jewish parents, but we were, assimilated Jews. And the Torah of Manitou, of Rav Ashkenazi, is a Torah of identity. In other words, the primary thrust that he brings out is the idea of who we really are, who the Jewish people really are. And he teaches these things about the idea of us, that there's a transformation of identity that's taking place. He was able to grab much of French Jewry, like most of the French Jews you meet in Israel today. I've heard of him and know of him and see him as a great leader. He was called Manitou because his students gave him this name, meaning Manitou means in some Indian language, I don't know, we'd have to check on Wikipedia, but means great spirit. And that was the nickname that he was given by the people who knew him, because he was a holy man.
So when he says return to who we really are, is that on an individual level, or that it's on a collective level?
Well, it's at an individual level and a collective level. In other words, each individual, I'll tell you, one of the problems with Manitou is that he didn't really write. Yeah. And that's also why he's not well known. Uh-huh. What he did was he gave shiurim, lessons Baal Peh. Yeah. And that was on purpose. Why did he give it on purpose? Because the truth is that there's what's called wisdom, which is like mathematics. Yeah. 2 + 2, how much is 2 + 2?
4.
4. In America, it's 4. In China, it's 4. In Japan, it's 4. In Africa, it's 4. There are things that are correct everywhere. But the Torah is not wisdom. The Torah is speech. And so in speech, you're always talking to someone. Mm-hmm. And in the case of the Torah, it's the divine speech of Hashem speaking to a people that already existed in a language that existed. In other words, in order for us to really receive Torah, we have to be that nation that received the Torah. Mm-hmm. As individuals, in order for us to understand, if we're talking about Hebrew, if we're talking about being the Hebrew people that had culture and traditions and religion, there's so many things that you see that even in our Midrashim, they talk about that, when we see in the Passover Seder, for example, what was that? The Passover existed before the Yetziah from the Exodus from Egypt.
Yeah.
And what did the Jews talk about? And what Exodus did they talk about before they left Egypt? They talked about the Exodus from Aram, from the leaving from Aram and coming to the land of Israel, of Yaakov leaving. These are cyclical events that are taking place inside of our identity. But in order for us to understand the Torah correctly, we have to understand that it's a love letter from Hashem to a specific people. And if I was to write a love letter to Nancy, right, I could give her all kinds of hints and clues. We were at the beach, and you remember that day. I don't have to write everything down because I'm directing my speech to a specific person who has a specific identity. And one of the things that Rav Ashkenazi was very important for him is that, first of all, when I'm teaching Torah, we teach whoever we're talking to. He had students. I know some of his students that one of them, he said to him, whatever you do, Rav Ashkenazi himself, by the way, was a great philosopher. He knew all of philosophy, and parts of his what's so great about his writings or his teachings is that he integrates all of Western philosophy as well. He clearly holds it all in his fingertips. But he told one of his students, said, I want you to study Torah Sod, Kabbalah. Don't touch philosophy. He told the one guy that. And he told another guy, said, you have to study all the philosophers. So you can't write something like that down, because if he wrote the book, and now what happened was all of his students started, after he passed away, they're like, wait, we have this great treasure of Rav Ashkenazi. What are we going to do? And each of the students started to write down what they learned from him, and everyone learned something different.
Very interesting.
So
going back to the Rav Kook, because I've seen that Torah. I've seen that Torah of the nationalist, the holy, and the universalist. And I wonder what that third looks like when it's manifest, because the first two is very easy. It's called religious Zionism. Religious Zionism is essentially trying to weave together Torah and Zionism. But the universalism, I don't really see a movement that's kind of merging that with the first two. And I wonder what that would even look like, either how you thought it meant to Rav Kook or how it means to you.
You're asking me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So my answer to you is that you're absolutely right. In other words, that's the place we are in Jewish history right now.
Right.
That's what's so amazing.
Yeah.
In other words, you're right. We have a synthesis between religious and Zionist.
Yeah.
Okay, where the religious side, you could arguably be more religious than the religious. That's what they claim, at least, and more nationalist than the secular nationalists, and that's what they claim. Right. And there are those people. Yeah. And then you have the universal camp, which is saying, like, look at the world, be connected to the world, humanism, individualism, these kind of universal ideas. And they're not meshing. They're not synthesizing. They're in opposition one to another. That's where we are right now. And it's a wonderful place to be. Yeah. Baruch Hashem, that we're at this place, because now we have the potential of being able to synthesize them. Yeah. So for me personally, the way that I see it is, I think that the Torah is universal, and that's what Rav Ashkenazi Manitou taught. In other words, when Avraham Avinu, he's placed on the background always of the Tower of Babylon. Yeah. What is the Tower of Babylon? The Tower of Babylon was all of mankind trying to unite under false pretenses, and then being split into 70 nations. What is the natural state of affairs of the nations? War. How do I know? Because our prophet says, "Lo yisa," in the Messianic area, "Lo yisa goy el goy cherev." In other words, nation shall not lift a sword against nation, meaning that the natural state of affairs is war, right? Self-interest, my country against your country. It's an extended form of egotism. I want good for me or good for my people against you, like the Germans against the French. The job of Avraham Avinu is he receives a mission to unite all of humanity. That's why he's on the background of, and how do we know this? Because his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather is, if we go back, there's Noah. Noah had three sons, Shem, Ham, Yafet, right? Shem is the father of the Semitic people, right? Shem has a descendant called Ever. Ever is the father of the Hebrews, right? Abraham is called a Hebrew. He has a Hebrew mission. The Hebrew people, if you look at what is Ever, his sons, he had two sons. Their names were Peleg and Yoktan. And he said, who is Peleg? Why am I going to call him Peleg? Because in his days, Peleg means division. The mankind will be divided. What do you know? What's important for him is that, number one, that this division of mankind is something that's deeply problematic for him. Number two, we know that he has prophecy because how does he call his son about something that's going to happen? These are the two fundamental aspects of the Hebrew identity, according to Manitou. Peleg has sons, Sawug and Re'u, which also mean the names of these sons is like the uniting of humanity. Sawug, like to knit a kippah, Re'ut, like the brotherhood, until you get to Terach. Terach is like the descendant of the Hebrew people. Terach is, by the way, we know, well, he's in the Midrash, he's an idol worshiper. He has many idols, which we see in the Jewish people. Like, what are the idols? Are ideologies. Idol and ideology are the same thing. And you see that the Jewish people have a talent of creating idols, of creating ideologies. If it's Marx, if it's Freud, if it's many names that are many different ideas that we put out into the world. That's the nature of the Jewish people. But the mission that's given them to Abraham is to unite all of humanity. And that's what he's trying to do. We won't have time in the podcast to get into it, but I'd like to even talk to people about maybe trying to teach some of the teachings of Manitou about how Abraham takes on this Hebrew mission, the Hebrew mission of unity, of uniting humanity under one brotherhood, as Rabbi Yehuda Ashkenazi says, that the people of Israel is like the heart among the nations, right? All of mankind is one gigantic body, and each nation is a different limb, and each nation has a different purpose. And you cannot do without an eye or without an ear or without the knee or without, everyone has to be working together in unity, and that is the mission of the Jewish people. So when you ask me what is the universal idea, is that the Jewish people have to become the heart. We have to be able to unite the 70 nations of the world, and it's like it says, that there should not be any more war. That is actually written in the United Nations, outside the United Nations building. Have you been there? Yeah. Have you seen that?
I protested out there. Yeah.
You protested out there. Very good. I've never actually seen it, but I heard about it. Yeah. But one thing the United Nations forgot is that before that, there's another verse. They just took that verse, but they didn't take the verse before. Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. In other words, it's connected to the national mission of the Jewish people, to be a special nation, an example for the nations, and that's where we are in history. And all of the problems that we're having around us of the Iranian proxies and Putin and Egypt and all this great historical movements that are taking place around us are geared, that's our weight room. That's our weight room for us to be able to practice and learn how to combine and become what I sometimes call like Hebrew universalists. In other words, more nationalist, more holy, and more universal. At the same time, we have a unique universal mission, a unique universal vision that is different from the universal vision that is portrayed by the West, and different from the universal mission that's portrayed by Islam or the East. Yes. And it's our job now to formulate that for ourselves, to be that.
Right, because what universalism usually means in Christianity and Islam, convert the world to our faiths. That's that's the primary historical universalism, and this is we have to carve out our own unique approach to it. So, friends, I invite you to think of two things as we close. First, in thinking of Rav Kook's Torah, how do you yourself combine your nationalist commitments, your commitments to the holy, and your commitments to universalism? How do you cultivate that, and how do you synthesize them? And secondly, thinking of Manitou, if we are going to be the people who receive a love letter from Hashem, how can we become the type of people who can understand that, who can receive that? Thank you so much for sharing your Torah with us.
Thanks for having us.